In this lesson, I cover virtualizing domain controllers when you're virtualizing them on Windows Server 2012 Hyper-V. One of the biggest challenges with virtualized domain controllers is the use of snapshots. So if I go to my hypervisor, I could select a domain controller, such as my main DC01, and I can say take a snapshot. So a snapshot is a specific point in time view of that virtual machine. Its memory, its disk, everything. The challenge is any kind of directory service only ever expects time to go forwards. It doesn't expect you to suddenly roll it back 5 minutes, 10 minutes a day, which is exactly what happens if you apply a snapshot to a domain controller. So imagine this scenario. I've made some changes, so I'm using my relative IDs 0, 1 and 2, and then someone takes a snapshot. And it then carries on working, uses 3, 4, 5, 6. And now someone applies a snapshot. Now the domain controller has no way of knowing a snapshot has been applied. So all it knows is, well, I'm at relative ID number 2. So it will carry on and use 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and so on. So it's effectively reused ID 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So you're going to have objects with the same SID, which is a huge security challenge. Additionally, every domain controller has a USN, an update sequence number. And this is used between domain controllers to work out, well, which changes do I need to replicate? Well, that USN would also have been rolled back. So now when this domain controller that's been snapshotted tries to talk to other DCs, it's saying, well, here's my USN. The other domain controllers will say, no, I've had that already. So you get objects which now will not replicate. So you get these bubbles of replication. This is a very, very bad thing. This is one of the top causes of directory problems related to virtualization. And so in Windows Server 2012, if you're running Hyper-V version 2012 and you're running Windows Server 2012 domain controllers, there's actually protection now built in. So what happens behind the scenes is there's a new feature called a VM generation ID. And this is created by the hypervisor, and every single virtual machine has a VM generation ID. It's VM-generation ID. And the hypervisor looks at every virtual machine. If anything happens to that virtual machine that messes with its view of time, it gives that virtual machine a new VM generation ID. So messing with its view of time could be, for example, applying a snapshot, copying the virtual machine. So Active Directory uses this. A Windows Server 2012 domain controller running on Hyper-V stores that VM generation ID in its Active Directory database. Every single time it performs a write to the database, it does a check. It says, is the VM generation ID in the Active Directory database the same as the VM generation ID that Hyper-V is telling me? If they match, then everything carries on. Nothing has messed with its view of time. If they're different, then it means something has happened to that virtual machine. It's been copied, a snapshot has been applied, and really it goes into a crisis mode. At this point, it does things to protect itself and really protect you as an organization from a risk of corruption. It will discard its RID pool. So those relative IDs that would have been given to objects, it dumps them and is going to request a whole new RID pool. It's going to reset its invocation ID. So this is like a database identifier, and it's what's used with the USN to talk to other domain controllers. By resetting it, it can effectively start from ground zero and not risk those bubbles. It will reassert any requirements related to FSMO roles. So it's basically protecting you from any kind of corruption or bubbling from using a virtualized domain controller. Now, this isn't something you should constantly go and test and take lots of snapshots and apply them, but it should now not cause any harm in your environment. It is important to note, though, this feature is only available for Windows Server 2012 domain controllers and only if they're running on Windows Server 2012 Hyper-V or the free Microsoft Hyper-V Server 2012. This functionality will also be in future versions. The VM generation ID specification has been shared with other hypervisor vendors, so you may see this added into other hypervisors in the future, but currently that is not available, so you would need to check that before trying to use this functionality with any other hypervisor. But certainly the best practice does continue of do not use snapshots with domain controllers. Snapshot is a great feature for testing environments, for resetting a virtual machine back to a problem state so you can test things, but it should not be used in production environments, and certainly not with domain controllers. But if the worst happened, if it was done accidentally, at least now in Windows Server 2012, you're actually protected from any risk of problem. This concludes the lesson on virtualizing domain controllers with Windows Server 2012 Hyper-V.